The man who owns the bakery follows a very poor child who had stolen bread 3 times that week, intending to help him. But when he reaches the hiding place, he discovers something that makes him tremble. Jonathan was in the bakery kitchen, focused on cleaning the last crumbs from the counter. The day had been tiring but rewarding, with customers coming and going, praising the bread and pastries he made with so much care. The smell of freshly baked bread was still in the air, and he was already thinking about how nice it would be to sit on his couch at home and relax. But then, a strange noise interrupted his thoughts. He paused for a moment, with the sponge still in his hand, and listened. It was a soft sound, almost imperceptible, but definitely there. Maybe it was just the old wood of the bakery creaking, or the wind hitting a poorly closed window. Jonathan ignored the feeling of unease and went back to work. However, the sound repeated, this time clearer. It was as if something or someone was rustling bags or packages. He frowned, put down the sponge, and started walking towards the door that led to the main hall. Each step seemed to echo in the silent bakery. When he reached the door, Jonathan stopped, trying to listen more closely. The sound was coming from the darkest corner of the hall, near the shelf where he kept the leftover bread. He took a deep breath and decided to check. Maybe it was just a mouse, he thought, trying to calm himself. With careful steps, Jonathan advanced into the hall. The old lamps cast a dim yellow light, creating long, strange shadows on the floor. Jonathan walked slowly to the shelf where the noise was coming from. His eyes adjusted to the low light, and then he saw him. A boy, thin and frail, with dirty and faded clothes, was huddled there, trying to stuff some bread into an old, torn bag. Jonathan recognized the boy immediately. He had seen him before a few times during the week, discreetly taking 1 or 2 loaves and leaving unnoticed. Or so the boy thought. Jonathan always pretended not to see, not having the heart to confront him. After all, it was just food, and the boy clearly needed it more than he did. The boy was so focused on taking the bread that he didn't notice Jonathan approaching. When he finally realized the baker was there, he froze in fear, his eyes wide open, like a frightened little animal. Jonathan raised his hands, wanting to show he didn't mean to scare him. "Hey, calm down, kid," he said, his voice calm. "You don't need to be afraid of me." The boy clutched the bread to his chest as if it were a treasure, unable to say anything. His eyes were a mix of guilt and desperation, as if he were expecting the worst. Jonathan knelt down to be closer to the boy's height, trying to seem as unthreatening as possible. "Look," Jonathan continued, "I know you've been here before, and I never said anything because, well, I know you're just taking food. But you need to tell me why." The boy swallowed hard, his eyes filling with tears. He opened his mouth to speak, but the words didn't come out right away. It was as if he was struggling to find the right words. "My mom, he managed to say, his voice choked, "and I just wanted to help." Jonathan felt a tightness in his chest. He had already guessed the boy's situation wasn't easy, but hearing those half-formed words, spoken with so much fear and sadness, made everything seem much more real. He looked at the bread in the boy's bag, thinking about how that small theft was, in fact, a desperate act of someone who just wanted to take care of his family. Jonathan took a deep breath, trying to think of what to say. "I understand, kid. You can go." During the night and the next day, Jonathan couldn't get the boy out of his head. The image of that thin, desperate boy, hungry for a piece of bread, stayed with him all day. As he prepared the batches of bread, his worry only grew. He needed to know more. Who was this boy? Where did he live? And how was his mother to the point where the boy had to steal food? When night came and the bakery was closed, Jonathan decided to do something about it. If the boy showed up again, he would follow him. Not to accuse or scare him, but to understand his situation and try to help for real. It didn't take long before he saw the boy again. Like before, the boy entered, moving carefully as if he knew the place well. Jonathan, hidden behind the counter, watched him quickly grab some bread and leave in a hurry, almost running. Jonathan waited a few seconds before following him, keeping a distance so as not to be noticed. The streets were dark and silent, and the only sound was the boy's quick footsteps echoing on the pavement. Jonathan tried not to make any noise. The boy walked quickly, holding the bag of bread as if it were the most precious thing in the world. Jonathan followed him for several blocks, leaving the city center and entering a more remote area where the houses were older and poorly maintained. He wondered where this path would lead and what he would find at the end. After a few minutes, the boy turned into a narrow street and stopped in front of an abandoned house with broken windows and walls worn by time. Jonathan watched from a distance as the boy pushed open a creaky door, entering cautiously. The baker hesitated for a moment, but his curiosity and concern got the better of him. He approached, trying to be as quiet as possible, and peeked through the crack in the door. Inside, the scene he saw made his heart ache. In a dark corner of what seemed to be the living room, a woman lying on an old mattress, covered with torn blankets, was trying to sit up with the boy's help. Her face was pale, and burn marks were visible on her arms and hands. Next to her, a small girl, maybe about 5 years old, looked at the bread with wide eyes, both hungry and joyful at the same time. The boy, in a soft voice, said, "Mom, I got more bread today. Please eat some." The woman tried to smile, but the effort seemed too much. Jonathan realized that this wasn't just an abandoned house, it was a refuge for a broken family, struggling to survive. Jonathan stood there frozen, not knowing what to do. His heart was heavy with compassion, but also with uncertainty. He knew he needed to act, but he wasn't sure how. He continued watching the scene inside the house. The boy was kneeling beside the woman, offering her a piece of bread. His voice was low, full of care, and Jonathan could hear the words he was saying. "Mom, please eat a little. You need to get strong, to get better." The woman was slowly opening and closing her eyes, clearly exhausted. The burns on her face and arms were severe, with scars that spoke of deep and prolonged pain. She tried to smile at her son, but the gesture came out weak, almost like a reflex. I'll try, dear. But you and your sister need it more than I do." The small girl next to them looked at her mother with concern. The boy divided the bread into 3 parts, insisting that his mother eat hers. Jonathan felt a tightness in his chest, seeing the boy's care, his maturity forced by the situation. That child was carrying a burden far too heavy for his young age. The boy helped his mother bring the bread to her mouth, and she chewed slowly, as if each movement was a huge effort. Jonathan, unable to contain himself, took a step forward and bumped into the door, making a slight noise. The boy quickly turned around, eyes wide with fear, ready to protect his family. Jonathan raised his hands, trying to show he meant no harm. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to scare you," he said softly, trying to calm the child. I needed to know what was going on." The boy stayed silent, but didn't run. There was a deep sadness in his eyes, mixed with a tiredness no child should feel. Jonathan slowly moved closer until he was near enough to see the woman's condition better. She was clearly ill, and the burns were severe. "My name is Jonathan," he continued in a gentle tone. "I'm the owner of the bakery. I just want to help. You need help." The woman, despite her pain, lifted her eyes to him and tried to speak. We have nowhere else to go. He was just trying to keep us alive." Jonathan felt the weight of the situation bearing down on him. The abandoned house, the dirty clothes, the illness. Everything pointed to this family being at the edge. "How long have you been here?" he asked, trying to understand better. "A few weeks," the boy finally found his voice to reply. "After our house burned down, we had nowhere else to go." Jonathan felt a chill down his spine hearing that. He realized there was much more to this story than just the act of stealing bread. Before him was a family that had lost everything and was trying to survive in any way they could. He looked at the boy, then at the mother and sister, and knew at that moment that he had to do something for them, not just out of compassion, but because it was the right thing to do. "I'm going to help you," Jonathan said firmly. "I'll bring food and whatever else you need. You don't have to go through this alone." Jonathan got closer to the boy. As he approached, he noticed something he hadn't seen before. There were bruises on the boy's neck, dark and recent, standing out against his pale skin. The boy seemed to try to hide them, keeping his head down, but they were impossible to ignore. "Hey, kid, what happened to you?" Jonathan asked. The boy avoided Jonathan's gaze, shrugging his shoulders as if he didn't want to answer. Nothing. I just fell. Jonathan felt his stomach churn. He had seen those kinds of marks before and knew they weren't from a simple fall. As he looked at the boy, his eyes moved to the woman lying on the mattress. The burns on her body were even more visible now that he was closer. The scars were severe, some still red and irritated, showing that the fire had caused deep damage. Jonathan took a deep breath, trying to process the gravity of the situation. "This wasn't just an accident, was it?" he asked, trying to stay calm, but the lump in his throat was hard to ignore. The woman looked at him with shame. She tried to respond, but the weakness in her voice barely allowed the words to come out. "It wasn't an accident. It was what was left of our lives after they came after us." The boy finally lifted his eyes, full of fear and sadness. They hit me when they tried to get us. My mom tried to protect us." Jonathan felt a wave of anger and sorrow. This child and his mother had been through something terrible, much worse than he had imagined. He crouched down to the boy's level and spoke in the gentlest voice he could muster. "I promise you, this is going to end. No one is going to hurt you or your family anymore. I'm here now and we'll get through this together." The boy looked at Jonathan, his eyes filled with tears, and for a moment the hardness he carried seemed to melt away. Jonathan realized that more than food or shelter, this family needed safety, someone to care for them and protect them. He didn't know exactly how he would do it, but he knew that somehow he wouldn't let them suffer anymore. Jonathan left the house with a heavy heart. That night he could barely sleep, thinking about the bedridden mother and the children, especially the boy with bruises on his neck. He knew he needed to act quickly. The next morning, he got up before the sun, did his tasks at the bakery, but his mind was elsewhere. He had already decided what to do. After closing the bakery, Jonathan went to the market. He picked up the foods he knew would last longer: rice, beans, canned goods, fruits, and fresh bread he had made that morning. At the pharmacy counter, he asked for pain and infection medicine, not forgetting some bandages. He knew it wouldn't be enough, but it was a start. In the late afternoon, with the groceries organized in bags, Jonathan headed back to the abandoned house. He walked quickly through the streets, anxious to get there. When he knocked on the door, it was the boy who opened it, looking at him in surprise. But when he saw the bags, his eyes lit up. "I brought some things for you," Jonathan said with a friendly smile. "Food, medicine, nothing much, but it'll help." The boy was speechless for a moment and then whispered, "Thank you, sir. You didn't have to." "I did, kid. Everyone needs a helping hand now and then," Jonathan replied, entering the house with the bags. The woman, still lying on the mattress, tried to sit up when she saw him come in. Jonathan went over to her, setting the bags down on the floor. "I brought some medicine too. I know it's not much, but it'll help with the pain and infection." She looked at him, her eyes full of gratitude, but also something deeper, as if she was struggling to accept the help. "I don't know how to thank you. We didn't expect this from anyone." Jonathan smiled, shaking his head. "No need to thank me. I just want you to be okay, and as long as you need it, I'll bring whatever I can, deal?" The next day, while making dough and baking bread, Jonathan couldn't stop thinking about that family. He wondered if what he had done was enough, and he just kept thinking about how to pass the hours quickly so he could take more food and see how they were doing. That night, after closing the bakery, Jonathan decided he would take the unsold goods to the family. He packed the bread and some sweets in a bag, along with a few more items he knew would make a difference. The street was silent and dark, making the walk to the abandoned house feel even longer. As he approached the house, the moon barely lit the surroundings, and the shadows of the trees made the place seem more isolated. Jonathan was about to call out for the boy, but something made him stop. Across the street, he saw a figure moving quickly towards the door. It was a man, tall, wearing a dark coat with the hood pulled over his head, his face hidden in the shadow. Jonathan instinctively shrank back behind a post, watching. The man seemed to know exactly where he was going, moving with confidence. He reached the door and, without hesitation, entered the house. Jonathan felt a chill run down his spine. Who was this man? Could it be the children's father? Or perhaps someone who posed a threat? Jonathan clutched the bag of bread to his chest, feeling his heart beat faster. He needed to know if this man was a danger to the family he was trying to help. He couldn't just ignore what he had seen. Slowly, he approached the house, stopping beside a broken window from where he could hear muffled voices coming from inside. The first voice he heard was the boy's, low and nervous. "Dad, you're back. I thought you wouldn't come anymore." Then a deeper voice responded, full of exhaustion. "I couldn't stay away for too long, but I can't stay. I just came to see how you are and bring some money." Jonathan felt a mixture of relief and uncertainty. So that was the children's father. But why was he so hidden? And why did he seem to be in such a hurry? He wasn't sure what to think, but something in his gut told him that the situation was more complicated than it appeared. He stood still, listening, trying to understand better, still hidden near the window as he continued to hear the conversation inside the house. The man, now identified as the children's father, was crouched next to his son. The boy, even though relieved by his father's presence, still seemed tense. "Jack, you can't keep doing this," the bedridden woman whispered, her voice filled with pain and worry. "This isn't a life for you. Or for us." Jack lowered his hood, revealing a tired face with deep circles under his eyes and an unshaven beard. He held the woman's hand, his eyes reflecting the guilt and pain he carried. "I know, Eloa, but it's the only way to keep you safe. If they find out where I am, they'll come after you, and I can't let that happen again." Jonathan felt a tightness in his chest as he heard this. Jack was clearly fighting to protect his family, but the fear in his voice suggested that he was running from something dangerous. He kept listening, his heart racing. "The traffickers, they won't stop until they find me," Jack continued, his voice low, almost a whisper. "I scammed them, took the money to try and pay for our daughter's treatment, but now I'm marked. They'll hunt me down to the end, and if they find you, they'll do worse than they already did." The boy looked at his father, his eyes full of worry. "Dad, what if we just left for good? Maybe then we could be at peace." Jack shook his head, squeezing his son's hand tightly. "We can't, son. I'll keep coming in secret, bringing what I can. One day I'll figure this out, but until then you need to stay safe." Jonathan, still outside, felt a wave of empathy for that family. Jack was risking everything to protect them, but it was clear he couldn't keep living like this. Jonathan knew he had to intervene somehow, but not at that moment. He stepped back, determined to come up with a plan to help this family, not just with food, but with something more lasting. The next night, he decided he needed to speak directly with Jack. After closing the bakery, he packed some bread again and headed to the abandoned house. This time, however, his intention was clear. He was going to confront the children's father and understand exactly what was happening. When he arrived, he saw Jack already inside the house, talking quietly with his son and wife. Jonathan knocked on the door, the firm sound echoing in the silent house. The conversation stopped immediately. After a few seconds, Jack opened the door, his gaze hardening when he saw Jonathan there. "We need to talk," Jonathan said without preamble. "I can't keep helping without knowing the whole truth." Jack hesitated, but opened the door a bit more, letting Jonathan in. The children were sitting close to their mother, looking at Jonathan with a mix of curiosity and apprehension. "So you're the baker who's been helping my family. What do you want to know?" Jack asked, crossing his arms, trying to maintain an air of resistance, but Jonathan could see the exhaustion in his posture. Jonathan took a deep breath, looking directly into Jack's eyes. "I overheard part of your conversation yesterday. I know you're running from traffickers and that you did something that made them come after you, but I need to understand what exactly happened." Jack sighed, running a hand through his disheveled hair. He seemed to struggle internally, but finally decided there was no point in hiding anymore. "I got involved with the wrong people," he began, his voice filled with regret. "I started selling stolen goods, things that were offered to me at a low price. At first it was just that, a quick way to make money, but it escalated. Soon I was in way over my head, involved in deals I should never have accepted." Jonathan remained silent, letting Jack continue. "When our daughter got sick, I panicked. The treatments were expensive and I couldn't afford them. That's when I made the worst decision of my life." Jack looked at his wife, who watched the conversation with sad but non-judgmental eyes. I took the money from the sales, money that was supposed to go to the bosses, and used it to pay for her treatment. Jonathan felt the weight of the situation. This explained a lot, but it also brought to light the seriousness of what Jack had done. They found out, Jack continued, his voice lower now, almost a whisper. They came after me, and when they couldn't find me, they burned down our house. We lost everything, even our youngest daughter, who I fought so hard to save. His voice broke at this point, and he needed a moment to continue. Since then, we've been on the run. I only come back to see them in secret, bringing whatever I can, but I know I can't run forever. Jonathan felt a tightness in his chest. Jack's situation was desperate, but he also knew that Jack's actions had put his family in danger. You did all of this out of love for your wife and children, Jonathan said, trying to understand, but now you need to protect this family in another way. Jack nodded slowly, as if he had known this all along but didn't want to admit it. I know. I just don't know how to get out of this, without them paying the price. Jonathan felt the weight of Jack's revelation hit him like a punch in the gut. The silence that followed was heavy, filled with unspoken words and suppressed pain. He looked at Jack, waiting for him to continue, to reveal what he had been carrying alone for so long. Jack took a deep breath. His shoulders slumped as if the weight of his guilt was too much to bear. It was all my fault, Jack began, his voice low, almost a whisper. When I took the money to pay for our daughter's treatment, I knew I was crossing a line I couldn't come back from. They warned me that if I didn't deliver what I owed, there would be consequences. But I was desperate. I couldn't let my little girl suffer. Eloa, hearing this, closed her eyes, holding tightly to the hands of her son and daughter, who were sitting beside her. The pain on her face was evident, but there was no anger, only deep, resigned sadness. I thought I could run, that I could protect them by hiding, Jack continued, his voice starting to tremble. But they found me, and when they didn't find me at home, they decided to send a message. They set fire to the house. Our daughter was inside. My wife tried to protect her, but she couldn't get out in time. The last sentence came out broken, the pain almost unbearable. Jonathan felt a lump in his throat. He saw the tears streaming down Jack's face, the guilt etched into every line. Eloa was injured trying to save her. The burns, they were severe. Since then, everything has fallen apart. I lost a daughter and almost lost my wife. And now, I'm desperately trying not to lose anyone else. Silence returned, heavy as a stone. Jonathan didn't know what to say. What could be said in the face of such pain? But he knew he couldn't let Jack sink further. He took a step forward, placing a firm hand on Jack's shoulder. You can't change what happened, Jonathan said with gentle firmness. But you can do the right thing now. We'll find a way to protect your family, without more running, without more unnecessary risks. Jack still had tears running down his face, but there was something new in his eyes, maybe a glimmer of hope or at least acceptance. I'll do whatever it takes to keep them safe, even if that means turning myself in. I can't keep running, not anymore. Jonathan stood in silence for a moment, thinking about everything Jack had confessed. The weight of that tragedy and the decisions that led to it were clear, but Jonathan knew that the only way to break this cycle of pain and fear was to do things the right way. He looked at Jack, at Eloa, and then at the two children, who watched him with tearful eyes, filled with hope. Jack, Jonathan began, his voice firm but full of empathy, I'm going to help you and your family. But for this to work, you need to make a difficult choice. Jack looked up, still teary-eyed but attentive. What do you mean? Jonathan took a deep breath, feeling the responsibility of what he was about to say. I'll make sure Eloa and the kids have everything they need, food, medicine, a safe place to stay. But you need to turn yourself in to the police, only they can help you. The silence that followed was heavy. Jack looked at Jonathan with disbelief, as if the request was impossible to accept. But if I turn myself in, who will take care of them? Who will protect them? Jonathan stepped closer, speaking with conviction. I will take care of them. I will make sure they're safe, that they have what they need while you face the consequences of your actions and the police deal with the criminals. Running isn't an option anymore, Jack. The only way to protect your family now is to stop this life of running and danger. Jack shook his head, struggling with the idea. What if they lock me up for many years? What if they come after me in prison? Jonathan gripped Jack's shoulder firmly. I won't let anything happen to them or to you. If you turn yourself in, we can negotiate a deal, maybe collaborate with the authorities, help bring down those traffickers. But you need to trust me. And you need to trust that this is the only way to ensure a future for your family. Jack looked at Eloa, who gave him a supportive look, even in her weakened state. You need to do this, Jack. For us. We can't keep living like this. The eldest son approached, holding his father's hand. Dad, do what you have to do. We'll be okay. Jack felt the words of Jonathan and his family echo in his mind. He knew they were right, but fear still held him back. Finally, with a deep, resigned sigh, he nodded slowly. I'll turn myself in, but only because I trust you, Jonathan, and because I know it's the right thing to do. Jonathan nodded, relieved. You're doing the right thing, Jack. We'll get your family out of this nightmare, one step at a time, and I'll be there for them while you do what you need to do. Jack remained silent for a long time, absorbing what Jonathan had said. He knew Jonathan was right, but the idea of turning himself into the police was terrifying. He thought about everything he had gone through, everything he had done to protect his family, and now he was about to put all of that at risk. But as he looked at the tired faces of his wife and children, he realized there was no other choice. But I'm scared. Scared of what will happen to them. Scared of what will happen to me, Jack finally said, his voice trembling. Jonathan nodded, understanding the weight of the decision. I know, Jack, and it's normal to be afraid, but you're doing this for them, for the safety and future of your family, and I promise I'll take care of them while you're away. They won't be alone. Jack sighed deeply, as if trying to release all the weight he was carrying. He looked at Eloa, who gave him a weak but encouraging smile. You're doing the right thing, Jack, she said softly. We're going to be okay. The eldest son approached and placed a hand on his father's shoulder. Dad will wait for you, and when all this is over, we'll be together again. Jack closed his eyes for a moment, fighting back tears. He knew he couldn't keep running, that he needed to face the consequences of his choices, even if it was the hardest thing he'd ever done. All right, he said, finally opening his eyes and facing Jonathan with determination. I accept your conditions. I'll turn myself in. Thank you, Jonathan, and for everything. I just hope that in the end all of this is worth it. Jonathan looked at Jack and with a firm but understanding tone replied, It will be worth it, Jack, I promise you. After Jack agreed to turn himself in, Jonathan knew the next step was to ensure the safety and well-being of the family. He saw the worry in Jack's eyes, who was about to leave everything in someone else's hands. Jonathan couldn't let that burden be too much for the already overwhelmed father. The next day, Jonathan returned to the abandoned house, but this time with an even greater sense of responsibility. When he entered, he found Eloa lying down, with the children by her side, trying to maintain a fragile normalcy. Jack was sitting next to her, holding her hand, as if trying to absorb all the strength he could before leaving. Jack, Jonathan began, his voice firm but full of compassion, I want you to know that while you're facing what you need to face, I'll take care of them. I'll bring food, medicine, whatever is needed, and I'll make sure they have a safe place to stay. Jack looked at Jonathan, gratitude and relief mixed with sadness in his eyes. I don't know how to thank you for this, Jonathan. Leaving my family like this, it's the hardest thing I've ever had to do. Jonathan approached and placed a hand on Jack's shoulder. You're doing this for them, and I'm here to make sure that sacrifice isn't in vain. I'll take care of them as if they were my own family. Eloa tried to sit up a little more with effort and looked at Jonathan with eyes full of gratitude. Jonathan, you're saving our lives. I don't know how we can ever repay you. Jonathan smiled gently, shaking his head. You don't need to worry about that now. The important thing is that everyone is safe. I'll take care of everything. And when Jack returns, we'll start over together. The eldest son, who had been listening quietly, approached Jonathan. Thank you. I don't know what we would do without you. Jonathan knelt down to be at the boy's level. I promise I'll do everything to make sure you're safe and well cared for. We'll get through this together." Jack stood up, preparing to leave. The moment was difficult, and the goodbyes were filled with contained emotion. He hugged each of his children, holding them for a while, as if wanting to hold on to that feeling for the tough days ahead. Finally, Jack looked at Jonathan, the last person he had to say goodbye to. "Take good care of them, Jonathan. They're everything to me." Jonathan nodded, his gaze steady. "I'll take care of them, Jack. You can leave knowing your family is in good hands." Jack hesitated, then added, "Before I turn myself in, I need to take care of some things. Make at least some money to help with Eloa's treatment. I'll be back in 2 weeks to surrender. Can you take care of them until then? For me?" "Of course, Jack. But the longer you wait, the more risk your family is in," Jonathan replied. Jack left the house with heavy steps, but there was a new determination in him, knowing that his family would be safe. Jonathan stayed behind, taking on the role of protector, feeling that his life had changed forever. Now, it was he who carried the responsibility of keeping that family united and safe until Jack could return to them. The next day, Jonathan had already taken Eloa to the hospital. He sat in the waiting room, his hands clasped in silent prayer. It was a small, cold space where the ticking of the clock on the wall seemed louder than ever. The children were beside him, trying to be strong, but he could see the fear in their eyes. The doctor finally entered, and Jonathan stood up immediately, his heart racing. "Are you Jonathan?" the doctor asked, and he nodded, his expression hopeful. "Eloa's surgery was a success. We were able to remove a significant portion of the damaged tissue and began the grafting process. She will recover, but the process will be slow. The burns are severe and she will need continuous care." Jonathan let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. The news that the surgery had gone well was a relief, but the doctor's words made it clear that the road ahead was still long. "Thank you, doctor. What do we need to do now?" The doctor looked at Jonathan with a sympathetic tone. "She will need constant follow-up care, daily dressings, physical therapy, and a special diet to aid in her recovery. And of course, emotional support. Burns are painful, and the recovery can be exhausting." Jonathan nodded, taking in the information. "We'll do everything that's necessary. Eloa is strong, and we'll help her through this." The doctor smiled slightly, seeing the determination in Jonathan's eyes. "That will make all the difference. I'll give you the instructions and the medication she'll need, but remember, this is just the beginning of a long process." When the doctor left, Jonathan knelt to be at the children's level. "Your mum's surgery was a success," he said with a reassuring smile, "but now she's going to need a lot of care and patience to recover. We'll do this together, okay?" The eldest son's eyes were bright with tears he was trying hard to hold back. "We'll do whatever it takes for her, no matter what." Jonathan put his hand on the boy's shoulder and looked at the younger girl, who hugged him tightly. "That's right. We'll be by her side every step of the way." The days that followed were challenging. Jonathan balanced his time between the bakery, the hospital, and his home, which had become a refuge for the children while their mother was in the hospital. He learned from the nurses how to do the dressings and the exercises Eloa would need to regain her movement. Each visit to the hospital brought physical exhaustion, but emotional relief, seeing Eloa making progress, even if it was small. Despite the pain and difficulties, Eloa showed a strength that inspired Jonathan and the children. After a week, the dressings began to reduce, and Eloa started to regain more independence. Jonathan was always there, whether to hold her hand during a difficult moment or to help the children understand that recovery was a slow but possible process. "We're going to get through this," Jonathan repeated to them and to himself, knowing that with patience and love they were on the right path to Eloa's recovery and the family's reunion with Jack. Jack knew the time had come. After everything he had been through, he could no longer run from the consequences of his choices. Sitting at the table in the small room where Jonathan had offered temporary shelter for his family, Jack stared at his hands, the same hands that in so many ways had contributed to his family's pain. Jonathan sat beside him, waiting silently, offering support simply by being there. Finally, Jack lifted his gaze, his voice full of resignation. "Jonathan, it's time. I need to turn myself in. I hope this money helps you take care of my family for now." Jonathan nodded slowly. "You're doing the right thing, Jack. But if you cooperate with the authorities, you might get a lighter sentence. It could be a way to start making amends and get back to them sooner. Jack shook his head with a heavy sigh. I know. I called to turn myself in, and they told me that if I give the names of the traffickers, I could get a minimum sentence, but I can't do that. Jonathan frowned, surprised. Why not? If you cooperate, you'll get a lighter sentence and your family will need you. Jack closed his eyes for a moment, as if struggling with the decision. Jonathan, if I give up those names, then they'll have a real reason to come after my family. These men they're dangerous and they wouldn't forget something like that. I've already lost a daughter because of them. I can't risk losing anyone else. Jonathan understood the depth of Jack's dilemma. The justice he could achieve by cooperating came at too high a price. Jonathan placed his hand on Jack's shoulder, looking him in the eye. You're choosing to protect your family, even if it means sacrificing your own freedom for longer. Jack's eyes filled with tears. Yes, if I stay quiet, at least they stay safe. I can do the time, however long it takes, but knowing they're alive and well, that's what matters to me now. Jonathan squeezed Jack's hand firmly, feeling the weight of the decision he had made. I respect your choice, Jack, and I'll do everything I can to keep protecting your family. You have my word. Jack looked at Jonathan, gratitude evident in his eyes. I don't know what we would do without you, Jonathan. Thank you, and for being here, for doing what I can't do right now. Jonathan simply nodded, determined to honor the promise he had made. We'll get through this, Jack, one step at a time. And when you return, your family will be here waiting for you. Jack took a deep breath, trying to prepare for what was to come. He knew the road ahead would be difficult, but he was ready to face the consequences, with the hope that, in the end, his family could finally find peace. A few days after Jack made the difficult decision to turn himself in, Jonathan was at the bakery, organizing things as usual, when the door creaked open. A tall man with a steady gaze and simple clothes walked in. He introduced himself as John Klein, a federal officer. Sensing that something important was about to happen, Jonathan invited him to sit down. Jonathan, I've heard about you and what you've been doing for Jack and his family, John began, his voice firm but not intimidating. I'm here because I believe we can help each other. Jonathan crossed his arms, both curious and cautious. How exactly do you think you can help, John? Klein leaned forward, his expression serious. I know Jack refused to give the names of the traffickers, and I understand why. But the truth is, without those names, the criminal network continues to operate and put more lives at risk. I want to offer him a solution. We can protect his family, and in return he helps us dismantle this network once and for all. Jonathan remained silent for a moment, reflecting. He knew Jack was caught between a rock and a hard place, torn between protecting his family and cooperating with the authorities. Jack is afraid that if he talks, his family will become a target, Jonathan explained, trying to convey his friend's dilemma. Klein nodded, understanding the gravity of the situation. I understand, which is why I want to offer full government protection. We can put them in a witness protection program. New identities, a new location far from any threat, but for this to work we need Jack's cooperation. Jonathan looked at Klein, recognizing the sincerity and professionalism in his words. He knew this was perhaps the only real chance to end this nightmare for good. This could be what Jack needs to feel like he's doing the right thing without putting his family at risk. Klein gave a slight smile, pleased to see that Jonathan was considering the proposal. Talk to him, Jonathan. Tell him this could be the redemption he's been looking for. We'll take care of his family's safety, and he can help us prevent others from suffering the same fate. Jonathan, already determined, agreed to bring this new possibility to Jack. I'll talk to him, Klein. If this means protecting Jack's family and ending this network, then it's what needs to be done. Klein stood up, extending his hand to Jonathan. Believe me, Jonathan, together we can make a big difference. Jonathan shook Klein's hand, feeling a renewed sense of hope. He knew convincing Jack wouldn't be easy, but this was an opportunity they couldn't afford to miss. Thank you, Klein. I'll do my best to make sure Jack understands that this is the best option. As Klein left, Jonathan took a deep breath, preparing himself for the difficult conversation he would have with Jack. The final decision would be his, but Jonathan was determined to show him that this was the safest and most just way for everyone. The days after John Klein's visit were tense. Jonathan went to the police station and talked to Jack about the officer's offer, and Jack was seriously considering cooperating, but the fear of what might happen to his family still haunted him. The decision hung in the air and time seemed to be running against them. One night, as Jonathan was closing the bakery, he felt a chill down his spine. Something didn't feel right. He looked out the window and noticed a black car parked across the street. The vehicle had been there since the early afternoon, but now, with the bakery empty, its presence seemed more menacing. Jonathan knew something was wrong. Without hesitation, he picked up the phone and called his home, where Eloa and the children were. "Are you all okay? Is anything strange happening there? Any strange car parked nearby?" he asked, trying to keep his voice calm. The eldest son answered, but his voice was shaky. "There's a car parked nearby." Jonathan's heart raced. "Listen, take only what you need and leave through the back door. Meet me at the corner of the bakery. I'll be there in 5 minutes." He hung up and quickly grabbed his car keys. As he left the bakery, he noticed the black car's headlights were now on. Jonathan knew he couldn't waste any time. He got into his car and drove quickly to the meeting point. When he reached the corner, he saw Eloa and the children, their faces pale with fear. "Get in quickly," he shouted, keeping his eyes on the rearview mirrors. They obeyed without hesitation, and Jonathan sped off, trying to stay calm as the black car now began to follow them. Eloa's eyes were filled with panic. "Jonathan, what's happening?" "Stay down and hold on tight," he replied, trying to keep his voice steady despite the growing fear. The black car followed them through the dark streets of the city, getting closer by the minute. Jonathan knew they needed to shake them off before they were cornered. He made a sharp turn onto a side street, trying to buy some time. The black car tried to follow but lost a few seconds on the curve. Jonathan took advantage of the gap and accelerated, but he knew they couldn't run forever. He spotted a series of narrow alleys ahead and made a quick decision. "Hold on tight," he shouted, as he turned the car into the first alley, driving at full speed. The children clung to their seats, while Eloa, despite her pain, tried to protect the kids with her arms. The alley was tight, and Jonathan forced the car through a space that seemed impossible. They heard the sound of the black car skidding behind them, but failing to follow through. Jonathan kept going, speeding through the streets until finally he saw no signs of being followed. When he finally stopped the car, everyone was breathing heavily. Jonathan looked back at the children and at Eloa, who was still trembling but safe. "We're okay. We made it." Eloa closed her eyes, letting the tears fall. "What are we going to do now?" Jonathan took a deep breath, trying to think clearly. "We're going to a safe place where they can't find us. And after that, I'm going to talk to Officer Klein. This needs to end, and we need to make sure you're protected." The children, still shaken, hugged Jonathan. He knew the danger hadn't passed, but the fact that they had escaped that night was a sign that they needed to act quickly. The time for waiting was over. When Jonathan finally managed to get the family to a safe place, he called Klein and explained the situation. Klein, who was at the police station, brought Jack to the phone. The baker's voice was urgent, full of tension. "Jack, they found us. They tried to follow us, but we managed to escape. We don't have any more time. It's now or never." On the other end of the line, Jack was silent for a moment, processing the gravity of the situation. He knew things had reached a critical point. His family had been pursued, and the danger was closer than ever. Finally, he spoke, his voice filled with resolve. "My God, this can't happen. We have to end this now. Please protect my family." Jonathan gave the address to Klein, and less than an hour later, Klein and Jack arrived at the safe location. When Jack entered and saw the tired faces of Eloa and the children, something inside him broke. He knelt beside his wife, holding her hand tightly, and then hugged his children, feeling the weight of his choices. "I can't keep doing this," Jack whispered, almost to himself. "I can't keep putting you in danger." Eloa, her voice soft but firm, responded, "Jack, the only way to protect our family is to do the right thing. We need to end this once and for all." Jack looked at Jonathan, who nodded, encouraging him. "Klein can help us, Jack. He's offered protection for you, but you need to cooperate. There's no other way. Jack took a deep breath, feeling his fear turn into determination. He knew he had no more choices to make, only one final decision. "All right," he said firmly. "I'll cooperate, Klein. I'll give you the names." In a small room, Jack finally began to speak, revealing the names of the traffickers who had turned his life into a nightmare. He described each one, their roles in the organization, and everything he knew about their operations. Each word felt like a weight lifting off his shoulders, but it also brought the uncertainty of what would come next. "I'm doing this for my family," Jack told Klein, his voice steady. "But you have to guarantee their safety. They can't pay for my mistakes." Klein nodded, taking the information with the seriousness the moment demanded. "We'll make sure of that, Jack. Your cooperation will help dismantle this network, and your family will be protected." When everything was said and done, Jack looked at Jonathan, who had been by his side the whole time. "Thank you, Jonathan. I couldn't have done this without you." Jonathan smiled, though there was still worry in his eyes. "You did what needed to be done, Jack. Now, it's time to ensure your family gets the peace they deserve." As Klein prepared to take Jack back into custody, there was a feeling of relief but also acceptance. Jack knew he was doing the right thing, even if it meant facing the consequences of his actions. The safety of his family was what mattered most, and finally, he had taken the necessary step to truly protect them. Given the need for the family's safety, Jack had to stand trial, and the trial was swift, but its impact was profound. He was sentenced to 5 years in prison, a sentence that, although difficult, seemed a light consequence considering everything that could have happened. In the courtroom, Jack listened to the sentence with his head held high, knowing he had made the right choice to protect his family. Jonathan was present, standing beside Eloa and the children. When the judge announced the sentence, Jonathan held Eloa's hand as she struggled to hold back tears. The children, though still young, showed a strength that was impressive. They knew the road ahead would be difficult, but they also knew that for the first time in a long while, they were safe. After the court was adjourned, Jack was taken away by the officers. Before leaving, he had the chance to say goodbye to his family. Eloa approached, holding his hands tightly. "We'll wait for you, Jack. No matter how long it takes, we'll be here." Jack looked at his children, tears in his eyes. "I promise I'll come back, and when I do, we'll start over, this time the right way." The eldest son, showing maturity beyond his years, nodded. "We'll be here, Dad, together like always." Jonathan, who had been a rock for the family throughout the ordeal, stepped forward and looked Jack in the eye. "I'll take care of them, Jack. They'll be in good hands until you return." Jack took a deep breath, trying to memorize each face, each expression of love and support that his family and Jonathan offered him. "I know they will be. Thank you, Jonathan, for everything." With one last look at his family, Jack was led away. Although the sadness was palpable, there was a sense of relief among everyone. They knew Jack was facing the consequences of his actions, but they also knew he had done it for them to ensure they were safe and free from the past that had haunted them. In the days that followed, Jonathan continued to take care of Eloa and the children, all under government protection in another city. He helped them settle into a new home, far from the shadows of the past. The family remained united, and although they missed Jack every day, there was a renewed hope in their hearts. Jack's letters, sent from prison, were read with emotion, and each word carried the promise of a better future. "I'll come out of here stronger," he wrote, "and when I do, our life will be different, I promise." Eloa, guiding the family with courage, kept the hope alive that the 5 years would pass quickly. "We're waiting for you, Jack," she wrote back, "and we'll be here, united, when you return." With Jack in prison, Jonathan took on an even deeper role in the family's life. He wasn't just the reliable friend who had helped during difficult times. Now, he was the constant presence, the safe harbor that the children and Eloa needed to move forward. The days were filled with challenges. Eloa was still recovering, and the scars from her burns required daily care. Jonathan had learned to take care of her with tenderness, changing her dressings and helping her with the exercises the doctors recommended. But beyond attending to Eloa's physical health, Jonathan also became the emotional pillar for the children. Every morning he was in the kitchen, preparing breakfast while the children got ready for school. "You need to eat well, there's a test today, isn't there?" he'd say with an encouraging smile. The children would smile back, comforted by Jonathan's constant presence. In the evenings, Jonathan helped with schoolwork, sitting at the table with them, explaining the material, and listening patiently when they were frustrated. He knew that his presence was more than necessary. It was vital for them to continue feeling safe and loved. "Jonathan," the eldest son said one evening after finishing his homework, "you're always here for us even when you don't have to be. Why do you do it?" Jonathan looked at the boy, feeling the weight of responsibility, but also a deep sense of love. "Because you're important to me. And I promised your dad that I would take care of you. Besides, I care about you as if you were my own family." The youngest daughter, who was drawing at the table, looked up at Jonathan with her big eyes. "You're like a mom to us now, always taking care of us and Mom." Jonathan felt a wave of emotion at hearing that. He had never thought of himself that way, but he knew it was true. He had become the maternal figure the children needed, offering love, protection, and guidance. He smiled, gently touching the girl's head. "I'll take care of you just like a mom would, and when your dad comes back, we'll all be one big family again." Iloa, watching the scene from the sofa, felt tears welling up in her eyes. She knew that Jonathan had filled an enormous void, offering not just help but genuine love. "Jonathan, you saved our family. I don't know what we would have done without you." Jonathan looked at Iloa, feeling a deep connection with her and the children. "You gave me a purpose, something to fight for, and I wouldn't want anything else. Ever since I saw your son leaving the bakery with the bread, we've been in this together, and I'll continue to be here for you until Jack returns." Over time, Jonathan became more than just a caretaker. He was the comforting embrace when the children needed solace, the calm voice that guided them in moments of doubt, and the encouraging smile that made them believe everything would be all right. 2 years after Jack's imprisonment, an unexpected turn of events finally brought the long-awaited peace to his family. John Klein, the federal officer who had offered Jack protection in exchange for his cooperation, led one of the largest operations against organized crime in the country. It was an operation that had unfolded quietly, away from the eyes of the media and the suspicion of the criminals. Klein and his team had worked tirelessly, gathering evidence, following leads, and using advanced technology to track the traffickers' movements. The operation spanned multiple states, with impeccable coordination between different law enforcement agencies. They managed to link each member of the criminal network to various crimes, from thefts to illicit transactions, and most importantly, all without compromising Jack. Security cameras that captured suspicious movements and clandestine meetings became crucial pieces of evidence for the case. It was based on these pieces of evidence that Klein was able to connect the traffickers to previous crimes without ever mentioning or exposing Jack's involvement. When the arrests began, it was a decisive blow to the criminal network. On a quiet afternoon, Jonathan received a call from Klein. The officer's voice was filled with satisfaction and relief. "Jonathan, the operation was a success. All the traffickers have been arrested and Jack's name was never mentioned. He's safe." Jonathan felt an enormous weight lift from his shoulders. "Does this mean they'll never know Jack cooperated?" "Exactly," Klein replied firmly. "We obtained all the necessary evidence through other sources. Jack and his family can move on without fear of retaliation." Jonathan thanked Klein and immediately went to the prison to visit Jack. When he shared the news, Jack was stunned for a moment, trying to absorb what it all meant. "Are you saying they've all been arrested, that my family is finally safe?" Jonathan nodded with a warm smile. "Yes, Jack. Klein did exactly what he promised. You're free and the past is buried. Now you can serve the rest of your sentence knowing that when you get out, there won't be any more threats." Jack closed his eyes, letting tears of relief stream down his face. "I don't know how to thank you, or Klein. This means the world to me." Jonathan placed a firm hand on Jack's shoulder with the same steadiness he had shown from the beginning. "You did the right thing, Jack, and now you can start planning the future with your family without the weight of fear." Jonathan then pulled out a wad of cash and handed it to Jack, saying it was to help pay off the traffickers through intermediaries and to settle the debt with interest. Jack hadn't expected that. "Jonathan," You're an extraordinary person. After everything you've done and continue to do for me and my family, it's like you're an angel, doing all this without expecting anything in return. I'll repay you 10 times over for this." With the fall of the traffickers, the dark cloud that had hung over Jack's life and his family finally dissipated. The operation was a milestone in the fight against organized crime, but for Jack, it signified redemption and the chance for a new beginning, free from the shadows of the past. 5 years had passed, and the day everyone had been waiting for finally arrived. Jack was released from prison, his heart filled with longing and a bit of apprehension. He knew much had changed, and he wasn't sure what it would be like to return to his family after so much time. But one thing was certain. He was ready to start anew. Jonathan was waiting outside, alongside Eloa and the children, who were no longer so little. The eldest son, now 15, was taller and stronger, and the youngest daughter, now 10, held Eloa's hand as she leaned on a cane, still recovering from the after-effects of the burns. When Jack stepped out, the morning sun blinded him for a moment, but then he saw them. His family was there, waiting for him, and time seemed to stand still. Tears filled his eyes as he took his first steps toward them. Eloa, despite the scars she still bore on her body, smiled at him with all the love and strength she had held onto during those years. "Jack," she whispered, her voice heavy with emotion. Jack approached and enveloped her in an embrace, feeling her warmth, feeling that he was finally home. "Eloa, I'm back, and I'm not going anywhere again." The children quickly surrounded him, and Jack hugged them tightly, realizing how much they had grown, how life had continued while he was away. "You've grown so much. I missed you all so much." The eldest son, his voice thick with emotion, said, "We missed you too, Dad." Jack looked up at Jonathan, who was standing a little further back, watching the reunion with a calm smile. "Jonathan, I don't know how to thank you. You kept my family together, gave them what I couldn't. I owe you everything." Jonathan stepped closer, placing a hand on Jack's shoulder. "You don't owe me anything, Jack. I did what needed to be done. And now that you're back, you can continue together, in peace." Eloa looked at Jonathan with gratitude. "Jonathan was a blessing for us, Jack, but now that you're here, our family is complete again." Jack, still trying to take it all in, looked at Eloa, seeing the marks the fire had left, but also seeing the strength in her eyes. "You went through so much and you're still here, stronger than ever." Eloa smiled, holding his hand. "We went through it together, even from a distance, and now we'll start over, one step at a time." Jonathan looked at the family, feeling a peace he hadn't felt in a long time. They had been through more than anyone should ever have to face, but now they were here together, stronger and more united. "Let's go home," Jonathan finally said. "We have a new life to build and we'll do it together." As they walked toward the car, Jack felt that despite the scars, there was hope for the future. He was determined to do things right this time, knowing that with his family by his side, and with Jonathan as a friend and brother, they could face anything. And so, with a heart full of gratitude and hope, Jack moved forward, ready for the new beginning.